Now, tonight, uh, I know that we're supposed to continue our Reformation tour, so to speak, but I was thinking about all that's going on with the election and all that other kind of stuff. And also somewhat the issues that have surrounded the election insofar as what people are saying, people within the church primarily, because that's really my interest, is people within the church. And I don't mean just within grace, I mean in the church as a whole. Because what people who are not believers say, well, they're non-believers, and so they're going to have a particular worldview that's going to demonstrate that fact. They cannot be expected to have ideas, hold ideas that are godly, that are informed by a Christian worldview, because they're not Christian. And so that's not something that I really pay much attention to, because, again, non-Christians are going to act like non-Christians. My primary concern is within the church, and especially because I have seen this, perhaps this election more than any other. Maybe it's because I'm paying more attention this time than I have in the past, but I have seen that many within the ostensible church, unfortunately, have taken stances that are contrary to a Christian worldview. For example, things like saying that abortion should not be the issue that makes you vote Republican, for example, or that makes you stay away from the Democratic side. Things of that nature. Things that when you look at them, you say, these things are obvious. These things are not, should not be in doubt when it comes to the Christian. How can a Christian in a good conscience go and pull the lever for somebody who agrees or approves of abortion, in many cases, almost unlimited abortion? I think that in the case of Biden, he has undergone quite an evolution on that score. When it comes to his running mate, Kamala Harris, she's been there for a long time. But in the case of Biden, if you think about him 30 years ago when he was in the Senate, for example, his stances were quite different than they are today. Now, I think that that's a function of a couple of things. Number one is the fact that he, in order to win in today's Democratic Party, you have to be pretty much a radical. No one who is not a radical is going to get the nod, going to get the nomination. I mean, that's just reality. And then secondly, is the fact that perhaps his mental acuity is not what it used to be. I mean, let's face it. And it's not just a matter of the jokes they've been making at his expense as far as how he forgets things and he falls asleep and this and that and the other. It's also the fact that you can see, it is demonstrable that the individual has some mental acuity problems. And so when I contemplate our political landscape and I see the fact that it is very possible that Biden will win, I think, it's a grievous thing. It's a sad thing. It's an unfortunate thing that our country has sunk to the level it has sunk, where an individual that is demonstrably incompetent can be chosen as our next leader. And that's not to say that Trump doesn't have his issues. I mean, we all are aware of the issues that Trump has. We have seen for the last 4 years that Trump is pretty much unvarnished. He says things unfiltered. And a lot of people say, well, he says it like it is, and he's not going to mince words and things of that nature. And okay, to a certain extent, that's good. However, there are times when there are things that are better left unsaid. Yes.
Regarding that, you were probably privy to that piece that John Piper, speaking of people in the church and their view of these things, So what about John Piper saying that you can't vote for Trump, or you ought not consider it?
Yeah, and I'm going to get to that, interestingly enough, because that is part of why I decided to address this subject tonight. Not just the
Okay.
election itself, but also that article. And so let me go ahead and get to that now, because the article was basically Piper saying that he he had problems with, for example, a lot of the Christian side talking about the problems that the Democratic side has as far as the abortion and the homosexual issues and things of that nature, but they were not giving enough attention to Trump and his coarseness and all the other issues that, in the opinion of John Piper, he thought were problems and faults that Trump had. And again, I'm not a Trump apologist. I'm not here to say, well, Trump doesn't have problems or whatever, because again, we all know his issues. We have seen him for the last 4 years, so I'm not going to belabor that point. But here's the point that I want to make about that, and that is that I think that Brother Piper is missing a very important aspect of biblical issues when it comes to sin in general. Let me read from John chapter 18, where, of course, we remember that Jesus is before Pilate, and he's having a discourse with Pilate, a conversation with Pilate here, because he has been turned over by the Jews to Pilate. And of course, the Jews, as we know, wanted him to be crucified because of the perception, a number of things: blasphemy, the fact that they were unbelievers. Obviously, they didn't believe that Christ was who he said he was, who he in fact was. There was also envy. We see that the evangelists talk about how Pilate was well aware that the Jews had turned Jesus over because of envy. So that was another reason. But notice what he says in a very famous part of the passage in John chapter 18, beginning verse 36. Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." And so, number one, the fact that we understand that spiritually our kingdom is from above, is not from this earth. Okay, but then secondly, and I think that more germane to the aspect of what we're discussing here tonight, is what he said, what Jesus said in the next chapter, chapter 19. And it is the following in verse 11. He said, Jesus answered, "You could have no power at all against me unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin." And so the point is that Jesus makes it clear that there are actions, there are activities, there are sinful activities that are worse than others. Here, for example, Judas, who knew better than Pilate, was guilty of a greater sin than Pilate's sin. Now, notice that Jesus makes it clear Pilate is still guilty of a sin. It's not that Judas is the guilty party, Pilate is an innocent party. They're both guilty, but Judas is more guilty than Pilate is. And so, how does that apply to our current situation, especially as it relates to the article that Piper wrote? And it's this: you cannot compare coarseness or rudeness, uh, things of that nature, or even if you talk about uh, maybe Trump has loose morals. You cannot compare that and say that that is equal. You cannot have a moral equivalency between that and abortion, for example, transgenderism, things of that nature. Not only abortion, but abortion on demand. You cannot make those two equal one another, which is what I think, unfortunately, Brother Piper did in his article. And that may not have been his intention, but that is what, in effect, he was saying, that we should not look upon the sin of abortion, for example, and give more attention to that than the sin of, loose morals or coarseness or rudeness, etc. Obviously, I disagree from a personal standpoint. And secondly, I disagree, as we have just seen, biblically speaking, the case is that there are sins that are worse than others. Remember that passage where the Lord talks about his servants. When he comes, he's going to call them to account. And he says, the servant who did not do his master's will, but did not know it, will be beaten with few stripes. But the servant that knew his master's will and did not do it would be beaten with many stripes. So it is obvious in the scripture that there are some sins that are worse than others. I know, for example, in the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus talks about how if you are lusting in your heart, you've committed adultery already. However, that's not to say that Jesus was equating the actual activity of committing adultery in the flesh with doing it in your heart, and saying those two things are equal and are no different. Killing somebody is not any worse than hating somebody. That's obviously not the case. The point was that Jesus was making was, don't think that you're innocent because you haven't committed the physical act. It wasn't trying to equate one with the other. And so, again, let's bear in mind that we can't equate sins in that way. And we can't, when it comes to politics, because that's the main issue today, we can't say, well, I'm not voting for this individual because this individual is rude or immoral, and maybe in his manner of living. But I'm not voting for this individual either because he agrees that the murder of unborn children is okay. And so I'm making an equal balance between those two. I think it's important also to remember that at the political level, not the moral level, at the political level, Trump has done, and if he is reelected, hopefully will continue to take some actions that are good actions, that are beneficial, that are seeking to at least roll back some of the things that the other side of the aisle has put into practice. If nothing else, he has slowed down that progression, and that is a good thing. I think, personally, my opinion is that our country has reached the point where, it's been pretty much given over by God to its depravities. And so I think that this trend is not going to be completely arrested. I think it's going to continue until this country just, basically falls apart, unfortunately. But that's not to say that it's not a good thing if that downhill, not climb, but that downhill progression is slowed somewhat. Obviously, for those of us who are believers, especially, if laws that will be detrimental to our living the Christian life, if those are put off by 4 more years at the very least, that's a good thing, obviously. And so I think that even at the political level, we can see that there's a distinct difference between the two sides. And so obviously the Lord will tell who ends up winning. And that is my second point. And I would like to read from Daniel chapter 2. And there you remember that Daniel is revealing the vision, or not the vision, but the dream to Nebuchadnezzar, who'd had a dream about well, I'm drawing a blank right now, but anyway, he had one of his dreams, and Daniel is explaining to him what the dream was about. And so, and I believe it was about the statue. Yeah, the statue. And so he's explaining the dream about the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had seen. So anyway, beginning with verse 20, this is before the explanation. Beginning with verse 20, Daniel says, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep secret things. He knows that what is in the darkness, and light dwells with you." So the point here is that God is the one that removes kings and sets up other kings. Obviously, we don't have kings anymore in our country, but the principle still remains. If Trump is to have 4 more years, it will be because God has ordained that he will have 4 more years. If Biden is to be the one that will win the election, it's because God has decided that Biden will be the one that wins the election. And so again, personally, if Biden wins the election, I think that is a further demonstration that this country is under the judgment of God, because giving such a leader who is incompetent, a leader who has obviously problems with mental acuity, a leader who holds so many immoral positions, gross immoral positions, can only be the judgment of God upon this nation. So we all need to pray that whatever the situation may be, that God would be merciful to us, that he will protect his church, that he will protect his people, as indeed he has promised he will. Sometimes he protects us from things, sometimes he protects us through things. And so whether by one or the other, let's pray that the Lord will be merciful to us and that we will continue to be able to worship, to serve him in a peaceful way. If, however, persecution is to come, then our prayer is that the Lord will see fit to preserve us, to keep us, to help us, and to give us the strength to be able to resist that persecution.